The fluorescent lights of the Sterling and Associates boardroom cast everything in surgical white, sterile, unforgiving, designed to expose weakness. Ellie Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany table, 7 months pregnant, her hands folded across the swell of her belly in a posture that could have been maternal protection or corporate armor. 11 board members lined both sides, their expressions ranging from poorly concealed contempt to clinical detachment. Richard Hayes stood at the presentation screen, laser pointer in hand, his silver hair catching the light like a predator's eye gleaming in tall grass. The presentation title filled the screen in sharp red letters: Executive Conduct Review. Ellie Sterling, CEO. Richard's voice carried the measured calm of a man who had already won. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 4 months, this board has received concerning reports regarding our CEO's judgment and conduct. What I'm about to present isn't speculation or rumor. It's documented fact. He clicked to the next slide. Security camera footage, timestamp visible. 3 months prior, 11:47 p.m. 2 figures leaving the executive suite elevator together. The image quality was grainy but unmistakable. Ellie Sterling in the black dress she'd worn to the anniversary gala, and Marcus Thompson in his business casual, their shoulders nearly touching. Margaret Powell, the longest-serving board member, leaned forward. Richard, we're all aware that Ms. Sterling is pregnant. Are you seriously suggesting we convene an emergency review over her personal life? Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. This isn't about personal choices, Margaret. It's about inappropriate workplace relationships with subordinates. Marcus Thompson is a senior project manager who reports directly to executives who report to Ms. Sterling. The power dynamic creates legal liability for... The boardroom door opened. Every head turned. Marcus Thompson stepped through the threshold, but not in the khakis and button-down shirt that had been his uniform for 3 years. He wore tactical black, FBI windbreaker, badge clipped to his belt, service weapon visible in its holster. 2 federal agents flanked him, and behind them, Special Agent Helen Cross, her gray suit as severe as her expression. Marcus's voice cut through the room with the quiet authority of a man who had spent years learning to command attention without raising volume. My name is Marcus Thompson, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. I've been working undercover at Sterling and Associates for the past 3 years. The silence that followed had weight and texture. Ellie's hand moved to her throat, her face draining of color. Richard Hayes's laser pointer clattered to the table. Marcus placed a federal evidence bag on the conference table. Through the clear plastic, a thick accordion folder bulged with documents. Richard Hayes has embezzled $237 million from Sterling and Associates over the past 6 years. Fake vendor accounts, offshore shell corporations, forged audit trails. I have wire transfers, email correspondence, recorded phone conversations, and testimony from 4 co-conspirators who've already accepted plea agreements. Agent Cross stepped forward, her credentials held high. We have federal warrants for the arrest of Richard Hayes and the seizure of all financial records pertaining to the following accounts. She began reading account numbers, her voice flat and bureaucratic, each syllable another nail in Richard's coffin. Richard found his voice, though it emerged strangled. This is... Thompson, you slept with your boss. You're trying to deflect from your own misconduct with these insane accusations. Marcus didn't blink. Ms. Sterling and I had a personal relationship that occurred outside of work hours and violated no company policy. We're both single adults who made a private choice that resulted in a pregnancy. That's between us, and has nothing to do with your systematic theft from this company's clients, employees, and shareholders. Margaret Powell's hands were shaking as she opened the evidence folder. These are client trust accounts, retirees, people who trusted us with their life savings. The documents told their story in stark numbers and damning detail. Marcus had spent 3 years building a case that was airtight, methodical, impossible to refute. Every late night he'd claimed to be working on the Morrison account had actually been spent photographing Hayes's fraud. Every weekend he'd told Zoe was mandatory overtime had been meetings with prosecutors, building the federal case piece by piece. Ellie's voice emerged small and brittle. "You're FBI." It wasn't a question. Marcus met her eyes across the boardroom, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the case or the board or the moment's chaos. 3 months ago, she'd been shattered on her office floor, grieving her mother, and he'd held her while she cried. One night of vulnerability had cracked both their carefully constructed facades. One night had created the child she now carried. One night, and he'd been lying to her the entire time. Her next words came harder. "How long have you known? About the baby, about... Did you know when you were building your case against Richard?" The question contained multitudes. Marcus heard all of them. "I learned about the pregnancy 12 weeks ago. The same day you told me. Everything I've done in this investigation has been to protect innocent people from a criminal. That includes you." Richard lunged forward, desperation making him reckless. "She knew. She had to know about the accounts. She's CEO. Agent Cross moved with practiced efficiency, positioning herself between Richard and the table. "Mr. Hayes, I need you to stand and place your hands behind your back." The arrest happened in clinical stages. Rights read in a monotone that suggested Helen Cross had performed this ritual hundreds of times. Handcuffs clicked with a finality that seemed to echo off the boardroom's glass walls. Richard's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally a kind of hollow resignation as 2 agents led him toward the door. He stopped at the threshold, turning back to fix Ellie with a look of pure venom. "Your father built this company on relationships I maintained. You think you're clean? You're sitting in a chair you inherited, not earned. And now you're pregnant by some..." Marcus took one step forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "Finish that sentence, please." The air between them crystallized into something dangerous. Richard's mouth worked soundlessly, and then the agents pulled him through the door. His exit left a vacuum that the remaining 11 board members rushed to fill with nervous conversation, anxious questions directed at Agent Cross, demands for clarity on what happened next. Marcus heard it all from a distance. His entire focus had narrowed to Ellie, who sat motionless at the head of the table, gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Margaret Powell's voice cut through the noise. "I'm calling for an emergency recess. We need legal counsel before we proceed with any decisions regarding..." Ellie stood, the movement careful and deliberate. "No, we finish this now." The room fell silent again. Ellie's gaze swept across the board, and Marcus recognized the look. He'd seen it in dozens of interviews over 3 years, the CEO marshaling her composure, transforming vulnerability into something harder and more useful. She addressed them with the clipped precision of a closing argument. "Marcus Thompson and I had a relationship that violated no company policy because we're both single adults with no direct reporting structure. I'm pregnant. I'm 7 months along, and yes, I should have disclosed the relationship to HR the moment I confirmed the pregnancy. That was an error in judgment on my part." Her hands moved to rest on the table, grounding herself. "Richard Hayes used my pregnancy as ammunition because he needed me removed before I could discover his fraud, which means my personal life became a corporate liability, not because of anything I did, but because this board created an environment where women's vulnerability could be weaponized." One of the younger board members, Thompson couldn't remember his name, some hedge fund VP, shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Sterling, nobody's weaponizing anything. But the optics of a CEO carrying on with a subordinate, especially one who turns out to be a federal agent," Marcus spoke before Ellie could respond. "I was the subordinate. If there's disciplinary action warranted, it should fall on me." Ellie's head snapped toward him. "Don't. I pursued the relationship. I knew the complications it could create, both for the investigation and for your position. If someone needs to resign to preserve Sterling and Associates' reputation, I'm already gone. My FBI work here is finished." The words landed with more weight than Marcus had intended. His cover was blown. The case against Hayes was solid enough that Marcus's testimony would survive any defense attorney's character assassination, which meant his 3-year deep dive into corporate America, this strange double life of spreadsheets and surveillance, had just reached its expiration date. Ellie stood again, and this time her voice carried steel. "I'm taking a formal vote. Do I retain the board's confidence to continue as CEO, or do you want my resignation?" Margaret Powell raised her hand immediately. "You have my confidence." The votes came in steady succession. 9 for retention, 2 abstentions. No votes for removal. The hedge fund VP looked like he wanted to say something more, but Margaret's glare could have frozen molten steel. Ellie nodded once, a sharp dip of her chin. "Then I'm announcing a medical leave of absence, effective immediately, lasting through the birth and 8 weeks postpartum. Margaret, you'll serve as interim CEO. When I return, we're implementing a top-to-bottom audit of every account, every vendor relationship, every transaction over $10,000 for the past decade. If Hayes had accomplices inside this company, I want them found and prosecuted." She gathered her things, laptop, phone, the folder of documents she'd brought to what was supposed to be her own execution. "This meeting is adjourned." The board members filed out in clusters, voices low and urgent, already crafting the press release that would control this narrative before it controlled them. Agent Cross approached Marcus with a tablet, some paperwork that needed his signature, details about testimony schedules and deposition dates that Marcus processed on autopilot. Then it was just Marcus and Ellie in the boardroom, 42 floors above Cleveland, the March afternoon light slanting through floor-to-ceiling windows. Ellie spoke first, her voice scraped raw. 3 years. Marcus nodded. 3 years of lying. Every conversation we had about accounts, about clients, about strategy. You were gathering evidence. I was doing my job. Your job. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. And that night? 3 months ago, when I fell apart in my office and was that your job too? The question hit harder than any of Richard's accusations. Marcus had known it was coming, had prepared for it during sleepless nights when Zoe asked him why he looked so tired, and he couldn't tell her the truth. But preparation didn't make the answer any easier. That night was the first real thing I'd done in 3 years. Everything else, the performance reviews, the project meetings, the casual conversations by the coffee machine, all of it was cover. But you, grieving your mother, trusting me with that pain. His voice caught. That was real. What came after was real. I was going to tell you. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. After the arrest, before the baby came, I had a whole speech planned about truth and consequences, and I don't want your speech. Ellie's eyes were dry, but Marcus suspected that was force of will rather than lack of tears. I want to know if you're the person I thought you were that night, or if you're someone who uses people's worst moments to get close to them. The accusation would have been easier if it was shouted. Instead, Ellie delivered it with the same measured calm she'd used to address the board. Clinical, surgical, designed to expose weakness. Marcus thought about the question properly, turning it over in his mind like evidence. I don't know who I am anymore. The cover became more real than the truth, and my daughter thinks I'm just working late. He met Ellie's gaze. I definitely don't know how to be a father to your child, but I'm trying to figure it out. Ellie gathered her laptop bag, movements careful around her pregnant belly. I need time to process this. She stopped at the door, one hand on the frame. Did you mean it? What you said to the board about the relationship being real. Marcus could have deflected, could have given her a careful non-answer that preserved his options. 3 years undercover had taught him how to navigate conversations like a minefield, always leaving himself an exit. Instead, he chose the harder truth. I meant it. Every word. Ellie nodded, something shifting in her expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Then she was gone, the boardroom door clicking shut with a sound like a chapter ending. 4 months earlier, Marcus Thompson's apartment occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood, 1,500 square feet that he and Zoe had turned into something resembling a home through accumulated effort and thrift store finds. The exposed brick walls gave the space character that almost compensated for the radiator's tendency to clank like a prisoner rattling bars. Almost. Zoe sat at the kitchen island, 12 years old and too perceptive for Marcus's peace of mind, her math homework spread across the butcher block surface in chaotic archipelagos. She'd inherited her mother's face, sharp cheekbones, wide-set eyes that missed nothing, and Sarah's habit of chewing her lower lip when concentrating. Sometimes Marcus looked at his daughter and saw his wife so clearly it stopped his breath. The coffee maker hissed and gurgled, producing something that approximated caffeine delivery. Marcus had long since given up on the illusion that late-night coffee was about taste. It was fuel, nothing more. Zoe glanced up from her homework. You're going in early again. Morrison account. Big presentation next week. The lie came smooth as silk because Marcus had been polishing it for 3 years. The Morrison account did exist, a massive portfolio restructuring that gave him legitimate reasons to work odd hours and access sensitive files. It just wasn't the real reason he'd be at Sterling & Associates at 6 in the morning. Zoe's pencil scratched against paper, working through some equation that Marcus would have struggled to solve. His daughter was brilliant in ways that both terrified and humbled him. 7th grade and already taking high school math, talking about MIT like it was a foregone conclusion instead of a dream that kept Marcus working 2 jobs and stashing every spare dollar into her college fund. Mrs. Patterson asked me if you were dating anyone. Marcus paused mid-sip. Mrs. Patterson lived next door and possessed both the curiosity of a professional investigator and the subtlety of a car alarm. What did you tell her? I said no. Zoe looked up, studying him with those 2 old eyes. Was I supposed to say something else? No. That was the right answer. You've been acting weird for weeks, Dad. Coming home late, checking your phone constantly, barely eating dinner. She tapped her pencil against her notebook. Whatever's going on, I can handle it. The statement carried more weight than it should have. Zoe had already handled more than any 12-year-old should. She'd lost her mother at 3. Too young to remember Sarah clearly, but old enough that the absence had shaped her. She'd watched Marcus disappear into work and grief, had learned to make her own breakfast and help with laundry and be independent in ways that sometimes broke his heart. She deserved the truth, but the truth would endanger everything. The investigation, his cover, possibly even Zoe herself if Hayes discovered Marcus had a daughter and decided to apply pressure. It's complicated work stuff. Marcus hated the words even as he spoke them. I promise I'll explain when I can. Disappointment flickered across Zoe's face before she masked it. You always say that. She returned to her homework with deliberate focus, and Marcus recognized the dismissal for what it was. His daughter had learned long ago that pushing him on work matters yielded nothing but frustration. So she stopped pushing and built walls of her own. Marcus rinsed his coffee mug, grabbed his messenger bag, laptop, 3 files that looked like Morrison account materials but actually contained photographed evidence of Hayes's shell companies, and headed for the door. Dad? He turned. Zoe wasn't looking at him, but her voice carried a question she'd been building toward. Do you remember what Mom used to say about living like life is a prison sentence? The memory surfaced sharp and immediate. Sarah, 3 weeks before the accident, sitting on their back porch while 3-year-old Zoe napped inside. "You're so afraid of making mistakes that you forget to actually live." Marcus's throat tightened. "I remember." "I think she'd be disappointed." Zoe's pencil moved across the page, solving for X. "Not in me. In you." The words followed Marcus down 3 flights of stairs and into the February pre-dawn cold. They were still echoing in his head when he pulled into Sterling and Associates' executive garage at 5:47 a.m., his access card granting entry to a building that would be mostly empty for another 90 minutes. The server room occupied a climate-controlled vault on the 38th floor. Marcus had spent 6 months cultivating a friendship with the night shift IT manager, a kid named Danny who loved craft beer and video games and never asked why a senior project manager needed occasional after-hours access to run data analysis reports. Tonight, Danny had called in sick, which meant Marcus had the server room to himself. He logged in using credentials he'd cloned from Hayes's workstation 3 months prior, another gift from his FBI training, the ability to slip into systems like water finding cracks. The files he needed were buried deep, protected by encryption that would have stopped a casual snooper but might as well have been tissue paper to someone with federal decryption tools. Wire transfers bloomed across his screen. $237 million, parsed out over 6 years in careful increments. Never enough to trigger automatic fraud alerts. Always structured to look legitimate. Consultant fees, vendor payments, portfolio rebalancing charges. Hayes had been meticulous. If Marcus hadn't been specifically looking for this pattern, hadn't spent 18 months mapping Hayes's financial network like a cartographer charting hidden rivers, he might never have found it. His phone buzzed. Text from Agent Helen Cross. "Timeline update?" Marcus typed back. "Need 2 more weeks. Want the offshore accounts locked down before we move." "You've been saying 2 more weeks for a month." "This case is airtight or it's nothing. Hayes will hire lawyers who make gods nervous. I need every transaction documented." 3 dots appeared, Helen composing a response. Then, "2 weeks. Then we pull you." Marcus downloaded the last batch of files onto an encrypted drive no bigger than his thumb. 2 weeks to finish the case that had consumed 3 years of his life. 2 weeks to... Footsteps in the hallway. At 6 in the morning, on a floor that should be deserted. Marcus palmed the flash drive and closed the server access window, pulling up a legitimate Morrison account spreadsheet just as the door opened. Ellie Sterling stood in the threshold, laptop bag over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in the severe bun she favored for early meetings. She stopped short when she saw him. "Mr. Thompson." "Ms. Sterling." Marcus kept his voice neutral, professionally distant. In 3 years, they'd exchanged maybe 24 direct conversations. He was a senior project manager among dozens. She was the CEO. Their orbits intersected rarely. Ellie's gaze flicked to the server terminal, then back to Marcus. "What are you doing here?" "Running analysis reports for the Morrison presentation. The servers are faster when nobody else is using them." Truth and lie braided together seamlessly. "At 6 in the morning." "I could ask you the same question." Something shifted in Ellie's expression. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement that they were both people who worked hours that violated sanity. "Board meeting at 8. I wanted to review the quarterly numbers without Richard breathing down my neck." Marcus logged out of the terminal, gathering his things. Ellie didn't move from the doorway, and for a moment they occupied the same small space, close enough that Marcus caught the scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that he'd noticed before without meaning to. "The Morrison account." Ellie's voice carried the tone of someone making conversation to fill awkward silence. "You've been project lead for what, 18 months?" 22. "Hayes says you're the best analyst we have. High praise from Richard." Marcus nearly laughed. Hayes's praise had been instrumental in maintaining his cover, giving him access to increasingly sensitive accounts. The COO had no idea he was handing rope to his own hangman. Just doing my job. Ellie studied him with an intensity that made Marcus wonder if she saw through the carefully constructed facade. But then she stepped aside, letting him pass. Don't work too hard, Mr. Thompson. The company needs you sharp for that presentation. Marcus nodded and headed for the elevator, hyper-aware of Ellie's gaze on his back until the doors closed. 3 months earlier, the Sterling & Associates' 25th anniversary gala occupied the entire top floor of the Ritz-Carlton. 200 people in formal wear drinking champagne that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent and making conversation that skirted carefully around any topic of substance. Marcus had attended exactly 3 of these events in his tenure, enough to maintain the appearance of company loyalty, not so many that people would remember him. Tonight was different. Tonight, Hayes was scheduled to make a presentation about the company's future growth, and Marcus needed to photograph the slides before they disappeared into Hayes's private files. He nursed a single glass of champagne, enough to look social, not enough to impair the manual dexterity required for covert photography, and worked the room's periphery. The camera was built into his cufflinks, FBI tech that cost more than Marcus made in 6 months, but performed like magic. A subtle gesture toward the presentation screen would capture high-resolution images that he'd download later. Ellie Sterling held court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and severe. She was in her element here, navigating conversations with board members and major clients with the practiced ease of someone born into corporate aristocracy. Her father had built Sterling & Associates from nothing, and Ellie had spent her entire adult life proving she deserved the throne he'd left her. Marcus had read the file on her. Stanford MBA, started in the company mailroom to earn credibility, promoted through legitimate talent rather than nepotism, or so the official story went. Took over as CEO when her father had a stroke 7 years ago. Ruthless in negotiations, brilliant in strategy, nicknamed the Ice Queen by people who meant it as an insult and by Ellie herself as a point of pride. The file hadn't mentioned that she looked exhausted beneath the perfect makeup, or that her laugh, when some board member told a joke that probably wasn't funny, sounded performative rather than genuine. Hayes took the podium at 9, launching into a presentation about expanding into emerging markets, diversification strategies, projected growth curves. Marcus photographed each slide with subtle movements that looked like adjusting his cufflinks. The numbers told their own story. Hayes was projecting growth funded by money he'd already stolen, building castles on embezzled dividend. By 11, the crowd had thinned to dedicated drinkers and people too important to leave first. Marcus had everything he needed. He should have gone home to Zoe, should have added tonight's photographs to the mountain of evidence accumulating in FBI servers. Instead, he found himself lingering. The presentation had finished 2 hours ago. The Morrison account documents Marcus claimed to be perfecting could wait until Monday, but something kept him rooted to the executive suite, running through fake revisions to slides he'd already perfected weeks ago. At midnight, he finally admitted defeat and started packing his laptop. That's when he noticed the light still on in Ellie's office, a rectangle of yellow on the 42nd floor visible from his desk on 38. Marcus told himself he was curious, told himself it was odd for the CEO to be working this late after hosting a major event, told himself a dozen reasonable lies on the elevator ride up. He knocked on her office door more out of instinct than plan. No response. He knocked again, harder. "Come in." The voice was wrong, flat, stripped of its usual authority. Marcus opened the door and found Ellie Sterling sitting on the floor beside her desk, mascara streaked down her face, an empty glass beside her, and a bottle of whiskey still half full. She looked up at him without recognition at first, her eyes focusing slowly. "Mr. Thompson," She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing the mascara worse. "What are you doing here?" "I saw your light on. Wanted to make sure everything was okay." Ellie laughed, and the sound carried edges sharp enough to draw blood. "Everything's fine. Perfect. My mother died this afternoon, but the gala had been planned for 6 months, so naturally I couldn't cancel. Wouldn't want to inconvenience the board." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd lost Sarah 9 years ago, but the grief was still there, buried under scar tissue but never truly healed. He recognized the particular devastation in Ellie's voice, not just sadness, but the guilt of someone who had prioritized work over presence. He should have offered condolences and left, should have maintained the professional distance that protected his cover, should have done anything except what he actually did. Marcus sat down on the floor beside her. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Ellie poured whiskey into her glass, then tilted the bottle toward Marcus in silent question. He nodded. She produced a second glass from somewhere, poured generously. "I was in a budget meeting when the hospital called. My mother having a stroke. They said I should come immediately." Ellie's voice was eerily calm, each word measured. "I told them I'd be there in 2 hours, after the meeting finished, because the meeting was important." She drank. Marcus drank with her. "She died 90 minutes later. I got there in time to hold her hand while machines breathed for her. The doctor said she was already gone, that even if I'd left immediately, it wouldn't have changed anything." Ellie's fingers tightened around her glass. "But I wasn't there. When it mattered, I chose a budget meeting." Marcus knew better than to offer platitudes about how she couldn't have known, how the doctors said it wouldn't have mattered. Grief didn't care about logic. "My wife died 9 years ago." The words emerged before Marcus could stop them, crossing a line he'd never intended to breach. "Drunk driver ran a red light. She was on her way home from parent-teacher conferences for our daughter's preschool. I was working late on a case, chasing some middle management embezzler who'd stolen maybe $200,000. Ellie turned to look at him, mascara streaked and raw. "I got the call at 7:30. Made it to the hospital by 8. She was already gone." Marcus stared at his whiskey glass, seeing Sarah's face reflected in the amber liquid. "For years I thought about that 90 minutes. What I could have said if I'd been there. How I could have—" His voice cracked. "But she was gone. And all I had left was our daughter and a job that suddenly felt completely meaningless." They sat in silence, two people who barely knew each other, bound by the particular fellowship of grief and guilt. Ellie refilled their glasses. "What's your daughter's name?" "Zoe. She's 12 now. Brilliant, terrifying. Takes after her mother in all the ways that matter." "Does she know about how Sarah died?" Marcus nodded. "I told her when she was old enough to understand. Figured she deserved the truth." "The truth." Ellie's laugh was bitter. "My mother spent 30 years sacrificing her own ambitions for my father's company. Brilliant woman, could have been anything. Instead, she became his support system, raised his children, managed his household. And when she got sick, when she needed someone to be there for her, I was too busy running the company she gave up everything to help build." She drained her glass in one swallow. Marcus did the same. "I swore I'd never be like her. Never dependent, never vulnerable, never letting someone else's needs supersede my own ambitions." Ellie's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, as if checking that her heart still beat. "And now she's dead, and I'm alone, and I don't know how to—" The sentence broke. Ellie's composure, that iron control she'd maintained through the gala and probably through the hospital and through every moment since the phone call, finally shattered. She folded forward, shoulders shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for hours. Marcus did what instinct demanded. He put his arm around her shoulders, and Ellie turned into the embrace like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. They stayed like that, CEO and project manager on an office floor at midnight. Grief. Recognizing grief across the gulf of professional hierarchy and personal distance. Marcus felt the exact moment when comfort became something else, when Ellie's breathing steadied and she lifted her head and their faces were suddenly very close. He should have pulled back, should have made some excuse about late hours and early meetings, should have remembered that she was his boss, that he was undercover FBI, that every rule and regulation forbade exactly what was about to happen. Ellie kissed him, or Marcus kissed Ellie. In the moment, it was impossible to say who moved first. What followed happened in a haze of whiskey and grief and need. Two people who had spent years being strong, being controlled, being everything except vulnerable, finally allowing themselves to break. The sex was desperate and messy and completely unlike anything Marcus had imagined corporate seduction might be. It was raw and real and human in ways that his 3-year performance as Marcus Thompson, project manager, had never been. Afterward, they lay on the floor of Ellie's office, their formal clothes scattered like wreckage. Ellie's head rested on Marcus's chest, her breathing slow and steady. Neither of them spoke. Words would have ruined whatever fragile thing they'd created. Dawn came through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Cleveland's skyline from black silhouette to gray reality. Ellie stirred, sat up, began gathering her clothes with efficient movements. Marcus watched her reconstruct her armor, the severe bun, the perfect makeup reapplied, the black dress zipped and smoothed until no evidence remained of the woman who'd cried in his arms. When she was finished, she looked like the Ice Queen again. Every piece in place. She met his eyes. This never happened. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. Never happened. Ellie left without another word, the office door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a chapter ending. Marcus sat on the floor for another 10 minutes, trying to reconcile what he'd just done with the mission he'd spent 3 years building. Then he packed his laptop, straightened his clothes, and went home to Zoe. He told himself it was a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness that wouldn't be repeated. He told himself the investigation would proceed unchanged, that personal complications wouldn't interfere with professional duty. He told himself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. 12 weeks later, Marcus's phone buzzed during his morning coffee. Zoe still asleep in her room, the apartment quiet except for the radiator's familiar clank. The text was from Ellie's assistant. Ms. Sterling requests a meeting in her office at 9 a.m. Private matter. The message carried implications that made Marcus's FBI training kick in. Private matter meant not business. Private matter meant keep this off company calendars. Private matter meant something had changed in the 3 months since that night, since they'd returned to their roles and pretended nothing had happened. Marcus arrived at Ellie's office at 8:57, punctual to a fault. Her assistant waved him through without the usual small talk, her expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Ellie stood at her windows, looking out at Cleveland 42 floors below. She didn't turn when Marcus entered. "Close the door." He did. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud. Ellie's reflection in the glass showed a woman who'd prepared for this conversation, the way generals prepared for battle. Every word chosen, every contingency planned. "I've been to 3 doctors. The results are conclusive. I'm 12 weeks pregnant. It's yours." The world tilted. Marcus's hand found the back of a chair, gripping leather and wood for stability. 12 weeks, 3 months, the exact timeline from that night. Math he didn't want to do completed itself automatically. If Ellie was 12 weeks now, that meant she'd known for at least 2 weeks, had been carrying this information, processing it alone. deciding what to do without involving him at all. Ellie finally turned to face him. Her expression was the one she used in board meetings, controlled, analytical, revealing nothing of the emotional calculation happening beneath. She moved to her desk, pulled out a folder, slid it across to Marcus. "I'm telling you as a courtesy. I've already consulted my legal team. These are your options." Marcus opened the folder. Legal documents, pristine and clinical, reducing his potential fatherhood to contractual terms. Ellie continued, her voice stripped of inflection. Option 1. Complete confidentiality. I handle this privately. Your name never appears in any documentation. Option 2. A formal agreement outlining limited parental rights and financial obligations. Option 3. Full acknowledgement and shared custody arrangements, though that would require disclosure to HR and potentially the board. She delivered it like a quarterly report, each option presented with pros and cons, legal implications clearly delineated. This was Ellie Sterling in her element, taking something chaotic and emotional and forcing it into a framework she could control. "Stop." The word came out harder than Marcus intended. Ellie's eyes widened slightly. "Excuse me?" "Stop presenting this like it's a business proposal, like our child is a problem to be managed." "That's exactly what this is." Ellie's composure cracked just slightly. "I didn't plan this. I've never wanted children, and I certainly never intended to complicate both our careers with a scandal that could destroy everything we've built." Marcus heard the fear beneath her words. Ellie Sterling, the Ice Queen, terrified of vulnerability, terrified of needing someone, terrified of becoming her mother, the brilliant woman who'd sacrificed everything for a man's ambitions and died alone in a hospital while her daughter chose a meeting. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "About the pregnancy." For the first time since he'd entered her office, Ellie's mask slipped completely. "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost her. Ellie Sterling, who always had an answer, who made billion-dollar decisions with surgical precision, had no idea what to do about the child growing inside her. Marcus moved around her desk, closing the distance between them. Ellie didn't retreat, but her posture stiffened, preparing for attack or defense. "I need to tell you something." The words felt like stepping off a cliff. "And you're going to hate me for it." Ellie waited. "I'm not who you think I am." Her eyebrows rose. "Meaning?" Marcus could stop here, could redirect to something safer, maintain his cover for 2 more weeks until the Hayes case wrapped. But standing in front of this woman carrying his child lying felt like a sin beyond redemption. "I'm FBI. Have been for 15 years. I was placed undercover at Sterling and Associates to investigate financial crimes. That's why I'm here. That's why I've had access to sensitive accounts. That night, 3 months ago, that was real. Everything else has been cover." The silence that followed had texture and weight. Ellie's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally a cold fury that made the Ice Queen nickname seem inadequate. When she spoke, her voice could have frozen magma. "Get out." "Ellie, get out of my office. Get out of this building. Get out before I called security and have you arrested for—" She stopped, legal training catching up to rage. "What are you investigating?" Marcus couldn't answer. The case against Hayes was classified, the investigation still active. Telling her would compromise everything. Ellie read his silence correctly. "Someone in this company, someone I work with, and you've been building a case against them while sleeping with me. I'm trying to protect innocent people from criminals." "By becoming a criminal yourself?" Ellie's voice trembled just slightly. "That night when I was grieving my mother, when I was vulnerable, was that part of your investigation too?" The accusation hit like a blade between ribs. "No. That night was the first real thing I'd done in 3 years." "I don't believe you." Marcus had no defense. How could he prove that one moment of genuine connection in a sea of lies was actually genuine? How could he explain that falling for his boss while undercover investigating her company was exactly the kind of complication that ended careers and compromised cases? Ellie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression hardening further. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. You need to leave." "What about—" Marcus gestured vaguely at her stomach. "What about it? You're FBI. I'm the CEO of a company you're investigating. Whatever personal arrangements we might have made are now legally complicated beyond function." She moved to her office door, opening it in clear dismissal. "I'll handle this. Alone. Like I handle everything else." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he wasn't abandoning her and that being FBI didn't mean being absent as a father. But Ellie's expression made clear that anything he said would be ammunition, not reassurance. He left her office, rode the elevator down 42 floors, walked through the lobby he'd entered, and exited for 3 years. Behind him, Ellie Sterling stood at her window, one hand on her pregnant belly, watching the city below and trying to figure out how to be something she'd never wanted to be. And Marcus Thompson drove home to his daughter, carrying secrets that were multiplying faster than he could contain them. 3 days after Marcus revealed his FBI identity, Zoe's school called during his meeting with Agent Helen Cross. Marcus let it go to voicemail, focused on Helen's timeline. 2 weeks until Hayes' arrest, depositions scheduled, grand jury convening. The usual machinery of federal prosecution grinding into motion. The voicemail was from Principal Whitmore, his tone suggesting concern rather than emergency. Marcus called back during his lunch break, standing in Sterling and Associates' parking garage where the concrete and steel made eavesdropping difficult. Whitmore's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news they'd rehearsed. "Mr. Thompson, there's been an incident involving Zoe and another student. I'd like you to come in this afternoon if possible." Incident was a word that meant everything and nothing. Marcus checked his watch. 2 hours until the Morrison account presentation he was actually giving this time. No FBI cover story. "I can be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Zoe's middle school took him through neighborhoods he'd canvassed during his first year undercover, mapping Hayes' network of shell companies to addresses that existed only on paper. Everything in Cleveland had become layered for Marcus, the real city and the criminal infrastructure hidden beneath it, 2 realities occupying the same space. Principal Whitmore's office smelled like coffee and institutional carpet cleaner. He sat behind his desk with the posture of a man who'd had this conversation too many times. Zoe occupied one of the chairs facing him, her expression locked down tight. In the other chair sat a woman Marcus didn't recognize. 40-something, expensive haircut, the kind of casual clothing that cost more than it should. Whitmore made introductions with the efficiency of someone trying to get through an unpleasant task. "Mr. Thompson, this is Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley. Her daughter Claire is in Zoe's science class." Marcus shook the offered hand, noting the Cartier watch and the way Mrs. Hartley's smile didn't reach her eyes. He took the remaining chair, positioned himself between Zoe and whatever was coming. Whitmore pulled a folder from his desk. "The girls were assigned as partners for the regional science fair. They've been working on a solar panel efficiency project for the past 6 weeks. This morning, Claire's father dropped off the display board and presentation materials. Claire is listed as the sole participant." Marcus looked at Zoe, who stared at her hands folded in her lap. Her jaw was set in the same stubborn line Sarah used to get when she was right and everyone else was wrong. Mrs. Hartley spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. "Claire worked very hard on that project, Mr. Thompson. She spent hours researching solar cell technology, building the prototype. We're very proud of her initiative." The words were pleasant. The implication underneath was not. Zoe's voice emerged quiet but steady. "I have my sketches. From 3 months ago when we first got the assignment. All the calculations for improving panel angles, the coating that reduces light reflection. Mrs. Hartley's smile hardened. Claire showed us her research notebook. Very detailed documentation. Because I gave her my notes. Zoe's control was cracking. We were supposed to present together. She said we'd share the display board design. Whitmore cleared his throat. The challenge is that Claire's name is on all the documentation she submitted. Without comparable proof of Zoe's contributions, Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos. 3 months of Zoe at their kitchen island, sketching designs, running calculations, building prototypes from cardboard and aluminum foil. He handed the phone to Whitmore. The principal examined each image, his expression shifting from neutral to uncomfortable. Mrs. Hartley leaned over to look, and something tightened around her mouth. These could be from any project. Mrs. Hartley's voice had lost its warmth. Claire has been working on solar energy for months. Perhaps Zoe saw Claire's work and... Are you suggesting my daughter is a plagiarist? Marcus kept his voice level through effort. I'm suggesting that mistakes happen. Sometimes students, especially students who might feel pressure to excel... Mrs. Hartley paused, and the silence carried implications Marcus had heard his entire life in different words, different contexts, always the same underlying message. Well, you understand. The competition can be very intense. Zoe's hands were fists now. Marcus recognized the tension in his daughter's shoulders, the way she was holding herself very still because movement might mean tears, and tears would mean weakness. Whitmore shuffled papers, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Without concrete proof of collaboration or independent work, the fairest solution seems to be allowing Claire to present... No. Marcus didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The fairest solution is comparing the work both girls can produce independently. Give them each a blank presentation board in 30 minutes. Same materials, same parameters. Let's see who actually understands the science. Mrs. Hartley's composure cracked. That's absurd. Claire already completed the project, then she should have no problem replicating her own work. Marcus met her gaze without blinking. Unless the issue isn't Zoe's lack of proof. It's that you can't imagine a black girl outperforming your daughter. The words landed like a grenade in the principal's office. Mrs. Hartley's face flushed red. Whitmore looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. How dare you? Mrs. Hartley stood, gathering her purse. I won't sit here and be accused of racism because your daughter wants credit she didn't earn. Claire worked hard. Just because Zoe needs to make excuses... Marcus stood as well, and the movement was controlled but contained enough presence that Mrs. Hartley took a half step back. My daughter has a 4.0 GPA, is taking high school math as a 7th grader, and has never needed to steal anyone's work. What she needs is for adults to judge her on her abilities instead of their assumptions. Whitmore raised both hands in a placating gesture. Let's all take a breath. Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Hartley, I understand everyone is protective of their children, then protect them fairly. Marcus kept his focus on Whitmore. My daughter has evidence of her work. She has the ability to demonstrate her understanding. If that's not enough, then we're not having a conversation about academics. We're having a conversation about what kind of students this school believes are capable. The meeting ended with Whitmore promising to review all evidence and make a determination by end of day. Mrs. Hartley left with barely concealed fury. Marcus and Zoe walked to the parking lot in silence. Inside the car, Zoe finally spoke. Thanks for believing me. Always. Marcus started the engine, then paused. Did Claire really steal your work? We were supposed to be partners. I thought... Zoe's voice wavered. I thought she was my friend. We did all the research together, built the prototype in her garage because she has better tools. Then this morning she shows up with everything in her name only. When I asked her about it, she said her mom thought it would look better for her college applications. The casual cruelty of it hit Marcus harder than it should have. Zoe was 12, too young to learn that friendship could be conditional, that trust could be weaponized, that sometimes people would take what you offered and claim it as their own. Except she was Sarah and Marcus's daughter, which meant she'd been learning those lessons since before she could remember her mother's face. What did that lady mean? Zoe was looking out the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. About students who might feel pressure to excel. What pressure? Marcus could deflect, could offer some generic explanation about academic competition. But Zoe deserved better than comfortable lies. She meant black students, students like you and me who have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. Students who make people uncomfortable when they excel because it challenges assumptions those people don't want to examine. Zoe absorbed this, chewing her lower lip. Is that why you work so hard? Why you're always at the office, always stressed? The question cut deeper than she knew. Marcus thought about the 3 years he'd spent being perfect, being invisible, being exactly what Sterling and Associates expected from a senior project manager while secretly dismantling their COO's criminal empire. Thought about how exhausting it was to exist in spaces that demanded constant proof of belonging. Partly, but also because I want to give you opportunities I didn't have. College fund, stable home, chances to be brilliant without apology. Mom wouldn't have liked this. Zoe's voice was small. You working all the time, me having to prove I'm not a cheater. She'd say we're living like prisoners. The observation stabbed through Marcus's chest. Sarah's voice echoed across 9 years. You're so afraid of making mistakes that you forget to actually live. You're right. Marcus reached over, squeezed Zoe's hand. Your mom would be disappointed. Not in you. Never in you. But in me, for teaching you that perfection is the price of existence. They sat in the school parking lot, father and daughter, carrying the weight of expectations neither had chosen. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Agent Helen. Hayes's lawyer contacted DOJ. He's requesting a meeting. Something's changed. The conference room at Sterling and Associates had been Marcus's domain for presentations dozens of times, but walking in that afternoon felt different. Ellie sat at the head of the table, 16 weeks pregnant now, though barely showing beneath the structured blazer she favored. Her face was professionally neutral, but Marcus caught the tightness around her eyes that suggested lack of sleep. Richard Hayes occupied his usual seat to Ellie's right, tablet in hand, stylus poised like a weapon. The rest of the executive team filled in. Chief Financial Officer, VP of Client Relations, heads of various divisions Marcus had come to know through 3 years of careful observation. Marcus set up his presentation, slides advancing with smooth precision. The Morrison account was real, a massive portfolio restructuring worth $40 million. He'd been legitimately working on it between his FBI duties, and the recommendations he was about to present were sound. He walked them through risk analysis, asset rebalancing strategies, projected returns over 5- and 10-year horizons. Hayes interrupted twice with questions that seemed designed to expose weakness, but Marcus had anticipated every angle. His answers were precise, supported by data, impossible to refute. Ellie watched him present with an expression that revealed nothing. Marcus wondered what she saw when she looked at him now. The project manager she'd worked with for 3 years, or the FBI agent who'd been lying the entire time, or maybe the father of the child she was carrying, the variable that complicated every calculation. The presentation concluded to polite applause. Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with undisguised suspicion. Impressive work, Thompson. Almost makes me wonder what else you've been working on that we don't know about. The room went very still. Marcus kept his expression neutral. I focus on assigned accounts, Mr. Hayes. Morrison has been my priority for nearly 2 years. Right. Your priority. Hayes tapped his stylus against the table. Funny thing, though. It flagged some unusual server access last week. Early morning hours, deep file directory searches. Any idea what that might be about? Marcus's pulse didn't change. 3 years undercover had taught him how to lie with his entire body, how to make truth and deception indistinguishable. I run analysis reports when the servers aren't congested. More efficient processing. At 5 in the morning? I have a 12-year-old daughter, Mr. Hayes. I work when she's asleep. Marcus saw Hayes's eyes flick toward Ellie's visible pregnancy, saw the calculation happen behind the COO's eyes. Hayes smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who'd just spotted weakness in the herd. Of course, family obligations. We should be more understanding of those. The meeting adjourned. Marcus gathered his materials, hyper-aware of Ellie's presence at the far end of the table. She was reviewing something on her tablet, pointedly not looking in his direction. Hayes approached as Marcus was packing his laptop. "A word, Thompson. My office." It wasn't a request. Marcus followed Hayes down the corridor to the executive suite, through doors that opened onto views of Cleveland stretching to Lake Erie's horizon. Hayes closed the door, moved to his desk, didn't offer Marcus a seat. The power dynamics were deliberate. Hayes standing, Marcus positioned where supplicants usually stood, the entire architecture of the room designed to emphasize hierarchy. "How long have you been sleeping with Ellie Sterling?" The question was designed to provoke, to catch Marcus off guard and force a reaction. Marcus gave Hayes nothing. "I haven't." "Don't insult my intelligence. I have security footage from 3 months ago. You and Ellie leaving the executive suite together at 6 in the morning after the anniversary gala." Both looking, Hayes paused, let the implication hang. Disheveled. Marcus recalculated rapidly. Hayes had footage, which meant he'd been watching, which meant he suspected something beyond inappropriate relationships. The question was, how much? Ms. Sterling's personal life is her business, not mine. Hayes moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Her personal life becomes company business when it affects her judgment, and lately Ellie's judgment has been questionable. Missing meetings, distracted during presentations. Something's changed. The observation was accurate. Ellie had been different since learning about the pregnancy, since Marcus had told her about the FBI investigation, more withdrawn, more volatile in the rare moments her control slipped. Hayes turned back to face Marcus. "I've been with this company 23 years, watched Ellie grow up in her father's shadow, watched her claw her way to CEO through talent and ruthlessness in equal measure. She's brilliant. But brilliant people make mistakes when they're compromised." "What's your point, Mr. Hayes?" "My point is that I care about Sterling and Associates, about protecting it from threats, internal or external." Hayes's smile was shark-like. "So if Ellie is involved with someone who might be using her, someone who might have ulterior motives, I need to know." The conversation had sharp edges underneath its corporate pleasantries. Hayes was fishing, trying to determine if Marcus represented a threat beyond simple workplace romance. The COO had built an empire on stolen money, and paranoia came with the territory. Marcus met Hayes's gaze without flinching. "I'm a senior project manager who does his job. Nothing more." "Then you won't mind if I have IT do a deeper audit of your server access. Just standard security protocol. Audit whatever you need." Marcus kept his voice level. "You'll find analysis reports and client research. That's all I've been doing." Hayes studied him for another long moment, then waved dismissal. Marcus left the office, rode the elevator down to his floor, and immediately texted Agent Helen. "Hayes is suspicious. Need to move timeline up." Her response came within seconds. "Can't. Grand jury not convened yet. 2 weeks minimum." Marcus stared at his phone, doing calculations he didn't like. 2 weeks for Hayes to dig into his background, to potentially discover the FBI connection before the arrest. 2 weeks for Ellie to navigate pregnancy while her company imploded around her. 2 weeks for everything he'd built to collapse. His phone buzzed again. This time the text was from Ellie. My office. Now. Ellie's office felt different in late afternoon light, shadows stretching long across the floor. She stood at her window again, a posture Marcus was beginning to recognize as her default when processing difficult things. She didn't turn when he entered. Richard is building a case against me. Marcus closed the door. Waited. He's been collecting evidence for months. Late arrivals, early departures, the one board meeting I missed because of morning sickness I couldn't control. Ellie's voice was flat, analytical. He's going to use the pregnancy as proof that my judgment is compromised, that I'm not fit to lead. He's embezzled $237 million. Marcus moved closer, careful to maintain distance. Whatever case he's building against you is smokescreen to hide his own crimes, which you can't prove for another 2 weeks. Ellie finally turned, and her expression was exhausted in ways makeup couldn't hide. You know what happens in 2 weeks? The quarterly board meeting, where Richard will almost certainly move for a vote of no confidence, where I'll have to explain why I'm pregnant by a subordinate who turns out to be FBI. The reality of her position hit Marcus fully. Ellie was trapped between Richard's political maneuvering and the federal case Marcus was building. When Hayes went down, the company would be thrown into chaos. When the pregnancy became public knowledge, the board would question her judgment. There was no clean exit, no scenario where she emerged unscathed. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. Ellie's laugh was bitter. I need you to not be FBI. I need this pregnancy to not exist. I need Richard Hayes to not be a criminal, so my company isn't about to be destroyed by federal investigation. She pressed her palms against her desk, steadying herself. Since I can't have any of those things, I need you to finish your case fast and leave before the collateral damage spreads. I'm not leaving you to handle this alone. You don't get a choice. Ellie's voice hardened. Whatever we were, whatever that night was, it's over. You're an FBI agent investigating my company. I'm the CEO trying to save it. We don't have a relationship. We have a conflict of interest. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to explain that the baby made them partners whether she accepted it or not, that he had responsibilities beyond his FBI mission. But Ellie's expression made clear that practical arguments would be ammunition, not reassurance. I saw the photos. Ellie's tone shifted, became something softer and more dangerous. On your phone, when you showed Principal Whitmore, Zoe at your kitchen table, working on her science project. Marcus tensed. He'd been careful to keep his daughter separate from his undercover life, to maintain walls between Marcus Thompson, FBI agent, and Marcus Thompson, single father. The overlap was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. She looks like Sarah. Ellie's observation carried unexpected gentleness. Same eyes, same intensity when she's concentrating. You must see your wife every time you look at her. Every day. The admission escaped before Marcus could stop it. Ellie moved to her desk, pulled out a folder Marcus hadn't seen her prepare. Inside were ultrasound images, grainy black and white pictures that showed something vaguely human-shaped floating in amniotic darkness. 16 weeks. Ellie's hand trembled slightly as she touched the image. They can determine gender now. Do you want to know? The question felt like crossing a threshold. Up until this moment, the pregnancy had been abstract, a complication, a problem to solve, a timeline counting down. Looking at the ultrasound made it real in ways Marcus hadn't prepared for. Girl. Ellie's voice cracked just slightly. Another daughter, for you. Another daughter, I have no idea how to. She stopped, turning away. Marcus saw her shoulders shake once, twice, before she locked the emotion down with visible effort. He crossed the distance between them without thinking, put his hand on her shoulder. Ellie stiffened, but didn't pull away. I'm terrified. The words came out raw. I spent my entire life avoiding this. avoiding dependence, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding becoming my mother. And now, I'm pregnant with a child I didn't plan, by an FBI agent who used me for his investigation, in the middle of a political coup orchestrated by a criminal COO. Marcus turned her gently to face him. Ellie's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, holding the tears back through sheer stubbornness. "You're not your mother." Marcus kept his voice quiet. "You're not giving up your career or your ambitions. You're navigating an impossible situation with more grace than anyone should have to." "I don't feel graceful. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let me help." Ellie pulled back, putting distance between them. "How? By finishing your investigation and destroying my company? By publicly acknowledging paternity and giving Richard exactly the ammunition he needs to remove me?" She stopped, her voice breaking. "I can't do this. Any of this. I'm not built for it." "Nobody's built for it." Marcus thought about that night in the hospital when Zoe was born, how terrified he'd been holding something so small and fragile and completely dependent. How Sarah had looked at him and said, "We'll figure it out together." How they had, until she was gone and he had to figure it out alone. Sarah and I had 9 months to prepare. We took classes, read books, built a nursery with our own incompetent hands. And when Zoe was born, I still had no idea what I was doing. Being a parent isn't about knowing the answers. It's about showing up even when you're terrified. Ellie wiped at her eyes, composure reconstructing itself piece by piece. "You had Sarah. You had a partner. I have—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "Whatever this is, which is nothing." The dismissal stung more than Marcus expected. "It doesn't have to be nothing." "Yes, it does." Ellie's voice regained its edge. "Because in 2 weeks, when you arrest Richard Hayes, this company is going to implode. The board will demand answers. Federal investigators will be crawling through every file. And when they discover the CEO is pregnant by the undercover FBI agent," she didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. They both understood the optics, the questions about compromised judgment and inappropriate relationships, and whether Ellie had been complicit in whatever crimes Marcus had been investigating. "I'll resign." The words surprised Marcus even as he said them. "From the FBI. Before the arrest. Make it clear you had no knowledge of the investigation." Ellie stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I've been an agent for 15 years. I've built this case. Hayes is going to prison whether I'm FBI or not." Marcus was calculating as he spoke, working through implications. "But if I resign before the arrest, if I come forward as a private citizen who discovered fraud, it doesn't work that way." Ellie's legal training asserted itself. "You were undercover on FBI authority. Everything you discovered is fruit of that investigation. Resigning doesn't erase the conflict of interest or protect me from questions about what I knew and when I knew it." She was right. Marcus knew she was right, but desperation was making him propose solutions that wouldn't survive scrutiny. Ellie moved back to her window, looking out at the city. "I need you to do something for me, she must." Marcus waited. "When you arrest Richard, when this all comes out, I need you to stay away from me. Publicly. No statements of support, no acknowledgement of the pregnancy, nothing that suggests we have any relationship beyond professional." Her reflection in the glass was ghostly, insubstantial. "Let me handle the board and the fallout on my own. Give me that much dignity." The request felt like amputation. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Ellie wasn't asking for abandonment. She was asking for space to fight her own battles without his presence making them harder. "What about after?" Marcus asked. "After the arrest, after the board, after the immediate crisis. What then?" Ellie was quiet for so long Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know. Ask me again when we're both still standing." Marcus picked Zoe up from school to find her carrying a blue ribbon and a smile that could have powered the city. She'd won the science fair. Principal Whitmore had administered the independent challenge Marcus demanded, and Zoe had reproduced her entire project from memory in 28 minutes, while Claire Hartley struggled to explain basic concepts. Mrs. Hartley tried to argue that the challenge wasn't fair. Zoe buckled her seatbelt, ribbon clutched in her hand like a trophy. Said Claire was too nervous to perform well under pressure. But Mr. Whitmore told her that science doesn't care about nerves, it cares about understanding. Pride swelled in Marcus's chest, overwhelming the day's earlier stress. Your mom would be so proud. I know. Zoe's smile faltered slightly. I wish she could have seen it. They drove home through afternoon traffic, Zoe recounting every detail of her presentation, the judge's questions, the moment when Principal Whitmore announced her victory. Marcus listened with the focused attention his daughter deserved, pushing thoughts of Ellie and Hayes and federal cases to the background. At home, Zoe went straight to the refrigerator to hang her blue ribbon with magnets. It joined a collection of achievements, honor roll certificates, art projects, a photograph of Zoe and Sarah that Marcus had taped there years ago and never moved. Dad? Zoe was looking at the photo, her expression unreadable. Do you ever think about dating again? The question caught Marcus completely off guard. Where's this coming from? Zoe shrugged, but the gesture was too calculated. You're always working, you never go out. Mrs. Patterson says it's not healthy for you to be alone all the time. Mrs. Patterson needs to mind her own business. But she's right, isn't she? Zoe turned to face him, and Marcus saw Sarah in her eyes. That same direct gaze that demanded honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable. Mom's been gone 9 years. Don't you get lonely? Marcus thought about Ellie in her office, asking him to stay away. Thought about the loneliness of living 2 lives until he couldn't remember which was real, sometimes. The honesty felt risky but necessary. But I have you. That's enough. Zoe's expression did something complicated. Gratitude and guilt and something that looked like fear. What if it's not enough? What if you meet someone and... She stopped, chewing her lower lip. What if you have another kid? Would I still matter as much? And there it was. The question Zoe had probably been carrying for weeks, maybe months. The fear that had been building underneath her too mature acceptance of everything. Marcus crossed the kitchen, pulled his daughter into a hug. Listen to me. You will always matter. Always. If I dated someone, if I had another child, if anything in the world changed, you would still be my daughter, my first daughter, the girl who makes me proud every single day. Zoe's shoulders shook once. Promise? I promise. Marcus held her tighter. Nothing in this world could make me love you less. You know that, right? I know. Zoe's voice was small, muffled against his chest. But sometimes I forget. They stood like that for a long moment, father and daughter, carrying fears that needed voicing before they could be set down. Finally, Zoe pulled back, wiping at her eyes. So if you did meet someone, and if there was a baby, I'd be okay with it. She managed a watery smile. Just so you know. Thank you, sweetheart. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. That means everything. They made dinner together. Pasta and vegetables, simple and quick. Zoe talked about the regional science fair she'd now qualified for, about needing to expand her project, about ideas for improving solar panel efficiency even further. Marcus listened and contributed suggestions, grateful for the normalcy of helping his daughter plan her next achievement. After Zoe went to bed, Marcus sat in his home office and reviewed the Hayes case files. $237 million stolen through elaborate shell game of fake vendors and offshore accounts. 6 years of systematic theft from clients who trusted Sterling and Associates with their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their financial futures. The case was airtight. When the arrest happened, Hayes would go to prison. The company would survive or not depending on how quickly Ellie could implement damage control. And Marcus would... His phone buzzed. Text from Agent Helen. Hayes's lawyer contacted DOJ again. He wants to make a deal. Marcus called her immediately. Helen answered on the first ring, her voice tense. Hayes knows we're coming. Don't ask me how, but he knows. His lawyer is offering testimony against co-conspirators in exchange for reduced charges. What co-conspirators? Marcus's mind raced through the evidence. Hayes had accomplices, the offshore account managers, the fake vendors who'd laundered the money. But they were bit players, not worth a deal. He's claiming the fraud goes higher than we think. That Sterling and Associates has been running similar schemes for years. That Ellie Sterling herself... No. Marcus cut her off. Ellie's clean. I've seen every file, every account. She had no knowledge of Hayes's fraud. Helen's pause was significant. Marcus, I need you to be objective here. The target's pregnant with your child. That creates... It creates nothing. Marcus kept his voice level through effort. I've been investigating this company for 3 years. Ellie Sterling is brilliant and ruthless and runs her company with an iron fist. But she's not a criminal. Hayes is deflecting. Then we need to move fast before his lawyer convinces DOJ that cooperation is worth more than prosecution. Helen's keyboard clicked in the background. I'm going to push for the arrest tomorrow. Can you be ready? Tomorrow. Marcus thought about Ellie's request to stay away when it happened, to give her space to handle the fallout alone. Thought about Zoe, who deserved a father not constantly consumed by work. Thought about the 3 years he'd spent being someone else, and whether Marcus Thompson, FBI agent, could coexist with Marcus Thompson. Single father and expectant father and man who'd fallen for the wrong woman at the wrong time. I'll be ready. He hung up and sat in the darkness of his office, looking at the photograph on his desk. Sarah, baffing, alive, 9 years dead, and still the measuring stick against which he judged every decision. What would you tell me to do? He asked the photograph silently. Sarah, of course, didn't answer, but he could imagine what she might say. Since when do you run from hard things? Marcus hadn't been running. He'd been working, building cases, maintaining cover while raising a daughter. 3 years of being 2 people at once. His phone buzzed again. This time, the text was from an unknown number. Stop investigating or your daughter pays the price. Marcus's blood went cold. He traced the number. Burner phone. Untraceable. The threat was clear and direct, and violated every boundary Marcus had tried to maintain between his FBI work and his family. He called Agent Helen back. We have a problem. The next morning, Marcus drove Zoe to school with an FBI surveillance team following 3 cars back. Agent Helen had taken the threat seriously enough to assign protection, though she'd been clear that without more specific information, there wasn't much they could do beyond watch and wait. Zoe noticed something was wrong. Dad, you keep checking the mirrors. What's going on? Just distracted. Work stuff. Another lie, added to the mountain he'd been building. At school, Marcus walked Zoe to the entrance instead of dropping her at the curb. He scanned faces, looking for threats he couldn't name, seeing danger in every stranger's glance. Dad, you're being weird. Zoe pulled her backpack higher on her shoulders. Seriously, what's wrong? Marcus crouched down to her level, aware that other parents were watching, that his paranoia was probably obvious. I need you to promise me something. If anyone approaches you, anyone you don't know, anyone who makes you uncomfortable, you find a teacher immediately and call me. Okay? Zoe's eyes widened. You're scaring me. I'm being careful. There's a difference. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. Just promise me. Okay, I promise. He watched her walk through the school doors, then returned to his car where Agent Helen was waiting in the passenger seat. The threat came from Hayes. Helen held up her tablet, showing trace analysis. Can't prove it definitively, but the burner phone was purchased at a store near his house. Same store he's used before for disposable phones. So he knows about Zoe. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He's threatening my daughter to stop the investigation. Which means we arrest him today. Now, before he can escalate. Helen was already on her phone, calling the tactical team. Meet us at Sterling and Associates in 30 minutes. Full federal presence. We're done being subtle. Marcus drove to the Sterling building with his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 years of careful investigation was about to culminate in public arrest, federal agents swarming the executive suite, everything he'd built exposed. And Ellie had asked him to stay away, to give her space to handle the crisis alone. His phone buzzed. Text from Ellie. Richard just called an emergency board meeting. Something's wrong. Marcus texted back. FBI is arresting him this morning. I'm sorry, I tried to give you warning. 3 dots appeared, Ellie composing a response. Then they disappeared. No reply came. Marcus parked in the executive garage and took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The board meeting was already in session. He could see through the glass walls into the conference room where Ellie sat at the head of the table, Richard Hayes presenting something on the screen. Agent Helen and 6 federal agents emerged from the second elevator. They moved with practiced efficiency, badges visible. The kind of presence designed to intimidate and control. Marcus led them to the boardroom. Through the glass, he saw Hayes mid-sentence, saw the moment the COO noticed federal agents approaching. Hayes's face went from confident to pale in seconds. Helen opened the boardroom door. Richard Hayes, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. The board meeting exploded into chaos. Board members shouting questions, Hayes backing away from the table, Ellie sitting frozen at the head with one hand on her pregnant belly and her eyes locked on Marcus standing in the doorway. Hayes tried to run. Stupid move. 2 agents blocked the exit while a third advanced with handcuffs. The arrest happened in clinical stages, rights read in monotone, Hayes's protests ignored with professional indifference. Marcus watched it all from the threshold, aware that he was witnessing the end of 3 years of work and the beginning of consequences he couldn't predict. Hayes stopped at the door, agents gripping his arms, and fixed Ellie with a look of pure venom. Your father built this company on relationships I maintained. You think you're clean? Everyone's going to know you're pregnant by some... Marcus took 1 step forward. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Hayes's mouth snapped shut, fear flickering across his face as he recognized the danger in Marcus's stillness. Then the agents pulled Hayes through the door, and he was gone, leaving silence in his wake. 11 board members stared at Marcus and Agent Helen. Ellie sat motionless, her face drained of color. Margaret Powell found her voice first. Someone want to explain what just happened? Agent Helen stepped forward, credentials high. I'm Special Agent Helen Cross, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Richard Hayes has been under federal investigation for embezzlement and fraud. We have evidence of systematic theft totaling $237 million over 6 years. The boardroom erupted again. Margaret demanding evidence, other board members shouting questions, panic spreading like wildfire. Marcus's eyes found Ellie's across the chaos. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Betrayal, fury, resignation, some combination that transcended simple emotion. Then she stood, gathered her laptop and files, and walked out of the boardroom without a word. Marcus watched her go, watched the door close behind her, and knew that whatever fragile connection they'd been building had just shattered beyond repair. The meeting location was a coffee shop in Shaker Heights, 20 minutes from downtown Cleveland, far enough from Sterling and Associates that they wouldn't encounter colleagues or press. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, chose a corner booth with sight lines to both entrances, fell back on FBI training, even though he was supposed to be on leave. Ellie arrived exactly on time. Patricia Chen nowhere in sight. She'd dressed down, jeans and a loose sweater that didn't hide her pregnancy anymore, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without the corporate armor, she looked younger and more vulnerable, though the wariness in her eyes suggested she'd armed herself in other ways. She slid into the booth across from Marcus without preamble. Patricia said this was a terrible idea. That meeting you violates about 6 different legal protocols and could compromise both our positions if Hayes's case goes to trial. Probably. Marcus kept his hands on the table, visible and still. Are you going to leave? I should. Ellie ordered tea from the waitress, who appeared, then waited until they were alone again. I've been doing a lot of things I should do lately. Following rules, maintaining distance, protecting myself from complications. And you know what? I'm exhausted. The admission carried weight. Marcus recognized the same bone-deep tiredness he felt, the kind that came from holding too many pieces together while everything fell apart. Rosa's files. Ellie's voice was steady, but Marcus heard the emotion underneath. My father stole from people for decades, built his fortune on targeting clients who were too scared or too marginalized to fight back. And I've been running his company, protecting his legacy, believing I was honoring something noble. You didn't know. Doesn't matter. Ellie's hands wrapped around her teacup. Ignorance isn't innocence when you inherit the proceeds of theft. Every dollar I've earned as CEO, every success I've celebrated, it's all tainted. Marcus thought about the files Rosa had shown him, the careful documentation of 30 years of systematic fraud. Your father's crimes aren't yours to carry. You were trying to fix it. Your notes prove you were investigating independently. 3 months too late. Ellie's expression was bitter. If I'd looked closer 2 years ago, 5 years ago when I first took over, I could have stopped Hayes, could have protected those families. But I was too busy proving I deserved the CEO position to question whether the company deserved to exist. The waitress returned with tea. Ellie didn't touch it, staring at the steam rising like she might find answers in the dissipating heat. I'm shutting it down. The words came out flat, final. Sterling and Associates. After restitution is complete, after victims are compensated, I'm dissolving the company. Selling assets, distributing proceeds to the families my father and Hayes stole from. It's the only way to make this right. Marcus hadn't expected that. You're giving up everything. I'm giving back everything I never deserved. Ellie finally met his eyes. My father built a criminal empire and I inherited it without question. The least I can do is tear it down properly. The decision was massive. Sterling and Associates employed 300 people, managed billions in assets, had been a Cleveland institution for 40 years. Dissolving it meant job losses, market disruption, the end of everything Ellie had worked toward. It also meant courage Marcus hadn't known she possessed. What will you do? He asked. After. Ellie's hand moved to her belly, the gesture unconscious and protective. I have a daughter to raise. That's enough purpose for now. The opening Marcus had been waiting for. Grace. You said you were thinking about naming her Grace. I did, didn't I? Something softened in Ellie's expression. My mother's middle name was Grace. She hated it, said it was old-fashioned, and suggested a delicacy she never felt. But watching her die, Ellie's voice caught. She had grace in those final moments. Dignity. Acceptance. Things I've never been good at. You're better at them than you think. Ellie's laugh was sharp. I'm sitting across from a man who lied to me for 3 years, pregnant with his child, about to destroy my family's company and legacy. If this is grace, I'd hate to see what disaster looks like. It looks like running. Marcus leaned forward. It looks like protecting yourself at the cost of everyone around you. It looks like building walls so high nobody can ever see you're human. You're not doing any of those things. You're facing the hardest truths of your life and making choices that cost you everything. That's not disaster. That's strength. Ellie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I'm terrified of being a mother, of failing this child the way my mother thought she failed me, of becoming dependent on someone and losing myself completely. Join the club. Marcus thought about Zoe, about the years he'd spent trying to be perfect while his daughter grew up learning to need nothing from him. I've been terrified for 12 years, since the moment they handed me Zoe in the hospital, and I realized I had no idea what I was doing. The terror doesn't go away. You just learn to function through it. How? The question was genuine. Searching. Marcus considered all the therapy sessions he'd avoided, all the parenting books he'd never read, all the times he'd muddled through on instinct and prayer. You function through the terror. You make decisions even when you're certain you'll mess up, because they deserve better than your fear. Ellie's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. I don't know how to show up for anyone. I've spent 42 years making sure I never needed to. Then learn. Marcus reached across the table, covered her hand with his. Ellie tensed, but didn't pull away. You don't have to do it alone. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You keep thinking partnership means losing yourself, but it doesn't. It means having someone to hold the pieces when you fall apart. Like you held mine that night. Ellie turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through Marcus's. When my mother died and I broke in my office and you just sat with me, didn't try to fix anything, just let me be broken. Best thing I ever did. Worst professional decision you ever made. But Ellie was smiling slightly. Your FBI handler is going to have your head for meeting me. Probably. I'm already on administrative leave. What's a little more career suicide? Ellie's smile faded. You can't throw away 15 years of FBI work for me. For this situation. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing what matters more. Marcus squeezed her hand. I've spent 3 years being someone else, living a lie to catch criminals. And you know what I learned? The lie becomes real. You lose track of who you actually are underneath the performance. Who are you? Ellie's question was simple, profound. Without the FBI cover, without the Senior Project Manager Act, who is Marcus Thompson? Marcus thought about the question properly. Who was he when he stripped away all the roles and performances and carefully constructed identities? I'm Zoe's dad, Sarah's widower who never properly grieved because I was too busy being strong. A man who's very good at finding other people's secrets and very bad at being honest about his own. He met Ellie's gaze. And I'm someone who wants to be there when our daughter is born. Who wants to figure out co-parenting even though we barely know each other? Who wants... His phone buzzed. Text from Zoe. Dad, turn on the news. Now! Marcus pulled up a news app, Ellie leaning over to see. The headline made his blood run cold. Breaking. Richard Hayes found dead in federal holding. Apparent suicide. The article was sparse on details. Hayes had been alone in his cell during regular check, found unresponsive by guards, pronounced dead at the scene. Preliminary reports suggested he'd used bed sheets to hang himself, though investigation was ongoing. Ellie's face had gone white. He killed himself. Marcus was already calling Agent Helen. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense. I was about to call you. Hayes is dead. Happened sometime between midnight bed check and 6 a.m. rounds. They're calling it suicide, but you don't believe it. Marcus's investigator instincts were firing. Hayes was offering testimony, making deals. He had no reason to kill himself. Unless someone convinced him he was more valuable dead than talking. Helen's voice carried implications she couldn't state directly on an open line. The co-conspirators Hayes was threatening to expose. They had significant motivation to keep him quiet. Are you saying he was murdered in federal custody? I'm saying the investigation is ongoing and you need to stay away from it. You're on leave, remember? Helen paused. How's Sterling taking it? Marcus looked at Ellie, who was staring at her phone with an expression he couldn't read. She's processing. Keep her safe. If Hayes was silenced, whoever did it might view Sterling as a loose end, too. Helen hung up before Marcus could ask more questions. Ellie set down her phone with deliberate care. Richard is dead. The man who stole millions, who tried to destroy me, who threatened your daughter. He's just gone. How do you feel? Ellie considered the question. I should feel relieved, or vindicated, or something. But all I feel is empty. Richard was a criminal, but he was also someone I worked with for 7 years, someone my father trusted, someone who... She stopped. He called me this morning, from jail. I didn't answer. The revelation hit Marcus harder than it should have. What did the message say? Ellie pulled up her voicemail, played it on speaker. Hayes's voice emerged thin and desperate, nothing like the confident COO who'd tried to orchestrate Ellie's removal. Ellie, it's Richard. I know you won't want to hear from me, but I need you to listen. Your father, Sterling Sr., he started all of this. The fraud, the targeting of minority clients, the shell companies. I just continued what he built. And there are others. Board members who knew, executives who took payoffs, people in positions of power who... The message cut off abruptly, like Hayes had been interrupted or thought better of continuing. Ellie's hand was shaking as she put the phone down. He was going to name names. Give me information to clean house completely. Her voice was hollow. And now he's dead. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Hayes murdered to prevent testimony. Hayes killed himself out of guilt or fear. Hayes's death staged to look like suicide to protect co-conspirators. Every scenario led to the same conclusion. The corruption at Sterling and Associates ran deeper than they'd discovered. You need protection. Marcus pulled out his phone. If Hayes was killed to keep him quiet, you're at risk. You know too much. You've been investigating. You have access to files. I'm pregnant and about to dissolve the company. I'm hardly a threat. You're the CEO with legal authority to access every file, every account, every piece of evidence Hayes was threatening to expose. You're exactly the kind of threat someone would want to eliminate. Ellie's voice was barely a whisper. What do I do? Marcus was already texting Agent Helen, requesting protection detail for Ellie. You let FBI keep you safe while they investigate Hayes's death. You stay away from Sterling and Associates until we know who else was involved, and you... The coffee shop window exploded inward. Marcus's training kicked in before conscious thought. He grabbed Ellie, pulling her down beneath the table as glass rained across the booth. Screams erupted from other patrons. Another window shattered, then another. Not gunfire. Marcus registered that even as he shielded Ellie with his body, someone throwing rocks or bricks, systematically destroying the windows, designed to create chaos and terror without actually killing anyone. Yet, Marcus pulled Ellie toward the back exit, keeping low, moving fast. Behind them, a brick sailed through the space where they'd been sitting, embedding in the opposite wall. Outside the coffee shop, an engine revved and tires squealed. They emerged into the alley behind the building. Marcus's car was parked 2 blocks away, too far with Ellie 7 months pregnant and struggling to run. He pulled out his phone, called 911, gave their location. Ellie was breathing hard, one hand pressed to her belly, the other gripping Marcus's arm. The baby. Is she... I can feel her moving. Is that normal? Marcus had no medical training beyond basic first aid, but he knew stress could trigger premature labor. We need to get you to a hospital. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching fast. Marcus kept Ellie moving away from the coffee shop, away from whoever had just tried to send them a message or silence them permanently. A car screeched around the corner, black SUV, tinted windows, accelerating directly toward them. Marcus pushed Ellie behind a dumpster and positioned himself between her and the vehicle, hand moving toward the service weapon he wasn't carrying because he was on administrative leave. The SUV stopped 10 feet away. The passenger window rolled down. Agent Helen leaned out. "Get in. Now!" Marcus didn't question it. He helped Ellie into the back seat and climbed in after her. Helen hit the gas before the door was fully closed, the SUV peeling away from the alley with professional efficiency. "How did you know?" Marcus demanded. "I've had surveillance on you since Hayes died. When the attack on the coffee shop started, we mobilized." Helen glanced in the rearview mirror. "Ms. Sterling, are you injured?" "I don't think so." Ellie's voice was shaking. "But I'm having contractions. Small ones. Every few minutes." Helen's jaw tightened. "We're going to Cleveland Clinic. Best obstetrics unit in the city. They'll check you and the baby." The drive took 8 minutes that felt like hours. Ellie's contractions intensified, her breathing becoming labored. Marcus held her hand and tried to remember anything useful from Zoe's birth 12 years ago. But all that came back was terror and helplessness. At the hospital, Ellie was rushed to labor and delivery. Doctors examined her, ran tests, attached monitors that showed the baby's heartbeat steady and strong despite the stress. The contractions were real, but not progressing. Braxton Hicks triggered by adrenaline, the doctor explained, not actual labor. "You're not dilating. Baby's not in distress. But given the circumstances, I want to keep you overnight for observation." The doctor, a calm woman in her 50s named Dr. Reeves, made notes on her tablet. "Stress can trigger early labor. You're 31 weeks, which means if the baby comes now, she'd need NICU care but would likely be fine. Still, let's try to keep her cooking a bit longer." Ellie nodded, exhausted. The doctors left to arrange a room, and suddenly it was just Marcus and Ellie in the emergency bay, surrounded by beeping monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospitals. "Someone tried to kill us." Ellie's voice was flat, shock settling in. "Someone threw bricks through windows because we..." "What? Know too much? Are investigating too deeply?" "Someone who's afraid of what you'll discover when you dig into your father's files." Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed. "Hayes said there were others. Board members, executives, people still in positions of power who can't afford for you to expose them." Ellie's laugh was bitter. "So dissolving the company isn't enough. I have to root out every conspirator, expose every crime, destroy every corrupt piece of my father's legacy, and hope someone doesn't kill me first. FBI will protect you." "Like they protected Hayes?" The question was sharp. "He died in federal custody, Marcus. If they can reach him there, they can reach me anywhere." The observation was valid and terrifying. Marcus thought about Zoe, about whether she was safe, about whether his entire family was now at risk because he'd investigated too deeply and fallen for the wrong person. His phone buzzed. Text from Zoe. "Dad, where are you? Mrs. Patterson says there was an attack and you're okay, but I need to hear from you." Marcus called immediately. Zoe answered before the first ring finished. "Dad? Are you hurt? The news is saying someone attacked a coffee shop and FBI is investigating and..." "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm at the hospital with..." He paused, calculating how much to reveal. "With the baby's mom. She's having some complications. Nothing serious, but they're keeping her overnight." Zoe was quiet for a moment. "Is the baby okay?" "Yes. Both of them are okay." "Are you coming home?" Marcus looked at Ellie, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not tonight. I need to stay here, make sure they're safe. But there are FBI agents watching our apartment. You're protected. I don't want protection, Zoe's voice cracked. I want my dad, the words stabbed through Marcus's chest. His daughter asking for the one thing he couldn't give because he was choosing to stay with Ellie and their unborn child instead of going home to Zoe. Choosing. Again. Always choosing between pieces of himself that couldn't coexist. I'll be home tomorrow morning. First thing, we'll have breakfast together and talk about all of this properly. Marcus kept his voice steady. I love you, Zoe. More than anything. You know that, right? I know. Zoe sniffled. Love you too, Dad. Tell the baby's mom I hope she feels better. Marcus hung up and sat in silence, feeling the weight of inadequacy pressing down. Agent Helen appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. We found who attacked the coffee shop. 2 men, hired through intermediaries. They're not talking yet, but we're working on it. She glanced at Ellie. Ms. Sterling, I need you to consider witness protection. Temporary relocation until we identify and arrest everyone involved in the conspiracy. Ellie shook her head. I'm 7 months pregnant and about to give birth. I'm not going into hiding. Then you're making yourself a target. I'm already a target. Ellie's voice was steel. Running won't change that. But finishing what I started, exposing every corrupt piece of Sterling and Associates, making sure every victim gets restitution, burning down my father's legacy so thoroughly that nothing corrupt can rise from the ashes, that might actually accomplish something. Helen looked at Marcus. Talk sense into her. She's right. Marcus surprised himself with the words. Hiding Ellie doesn't stop the people who want her silenced. Finishing the investigation does. Finding every conspirator, building cases against them, making sure they can't threaten her or anyone else. That's the solution. Which requires you to come off administrative leave. Helen's tone suggested she'd already anticipated this. Come back as FBI. Help finish what you started. Protect Sterling and your daughter by putting these people in prison. The offer was everything Marcus had been trained for. Return to FBI, leverage his 3 years of undercover work, be the agent who took down not just Hayes, but an entire network of financial criminals. It was also everything he'd been trying to escape. The lies, the double life, the constant performance of being someone other than himself. Marcus looked at Ellie, exhausted in the hospital bed, one hand on her pregnant belly. Then he thought about Zoe at home, asking when her dad would return. 2 daughters, 2 futures, 2 impossible choices. I'll do it. The words came out before he'd fully processed them. I'll come back. Finish the investigation. But on one condition. Helen waited. When it's over, when every conspirator is arrested and every victim gets restitution and the case is complete, I'm done. I resign from FBI. Permanently. The declaration hung in the air. Helen's expression cycled through surprise, understanding, and something that might have been respect. You're choosing family over career. I'm choosing honesty over performance. Marcus met her gaze. I've been an FBI agent for 15 years. I've been a good one. But I want to be a better father. And I can't do both anymore. Helen nodded slowly. All right. Finish this case, then walk away clean. I'll clear it with DOJ. She turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, you're making the right choice. After Helen left, Ellie reached for Marcus's hand. You don't have to resign for me. For us. I never asked you to. I'm not doing it for you. Marcus squeezed her fingers gently. I'm doing it for me. Because I'm tired of being someone I'm not. Because I want Zoe to have a father who's actually present. Because, he met Ellie's eyes, Because when Grace is born, I want to be there as Marcus Thompson, her dad, not as Special Agent Thompson investigating her mother's company. Ellie's tears fell silently. Grace. You keep calling her Grace like it's decided. Isn't it? I suppose it is. Ellie smiled through her tears. Grace Sterling Thompson. Both our names, both our families, both our broken histories coming together in someone new. Grace Sterling Thompson. Marcus tested the name, feeling its weight and promise. She deserves better than both our broken histories. Then we'd better figure out how to build her something wholesome. 9 weeks later, at 39 weeks and 6 days pregnant, Ellie Sterling's water broke during a board meeting where she was presenting the company dissolution plan. Marcus got the call while interviewing the 7th Sterling and Associates board member who'd taken payoffs from Hayes's network. The investigation had expanded beyond anything they'd initially imagined. 14 executives involved in the fraud, 6 board members complicit, a corruption network spanning 3 states and 20 years. But when his phone rang and Ellie's name appeared, Marcus ended the interview mid-sentence and drove to Cleveland Clinic fast enough that his FBI escort had trouble keeping up. He found Ellie in a delivery room, contractions 4 minutes apart, breathing through pain with the same controlled focus she brought to everything. Patricia Chen sat in the corner, laptop open, still working on restitution filings between contractions. You came. Ellie's voice was strained, but she managed to smile. Of course I came. Marcus took her hand, feeling it tighten as another contraction hit. Where else would I be? Arresting corrupt executives, saving the world, being FBI. I'm being a dad right now. Everything else can wait. The labor progressed fast. Too fast, according to Dr. Reeves, who kept muttering about precipitous births and women who couldn't follow standard timelines. 2 hours after Marcus arrived, Ellie was fully dilated and pushing, her composure shattered by pain and effort, and the sheer overwhelming physicality of bringing a human into the world. Marcus stayed at her shoulder, holding her hand, offering water and encouragement and presence. He thought about Zoe's birth 12 years ago, how Sarah had been so strong through 16 hours of labor, how she'd looked at him afterward and said, "We made something impossible. We made life." Grace Sterling Thompson entered the world at 4:37 p.m. on a Tuesday in late April, screaming her fury at the sudden cold and light and air. She weighed 6 pounds 2 ounces, had a shock of dark hair and eyes that couldn't quite focus yet, and grabbed Marcus's finger with a grip that suggested she had no intention of letting go. Dr. Reeves placed her on Ellie's chest. Mother and daughter stared at each other, both crying, both perfect, both terrified and brave and wholly unprepared for what came next. Marcus pulled out his phone, texted Zoe. You have a baby sister. Grace, she's beautiful. Come meet her. The response came immediately. On my way. Zoe arrived 30 minutes later, escorted by Agent Helen, who'd volunteered to pick her up from school. She stood in the doorway of the delivery room, backpack still on her shoulders, staring at the tiny bundle in Ellie's arms. She's so small. Zoe's voice was hushed, awed. I thought babies were bigger. Ellie looked up at Marcus's older daughter with an expression of pure vulnerability. Would you like to hold her? Zoe nodded, unable to speak. Marcus helped her wash her hands, then guided her to the chair beside the bed. Ellie transferred Grace with the careful nervousness of someone handling something impossibly fragile. Grace fit in Zoe's arms like she belonged there. She stopped fussing, her tiny face scrunching as she tried to focus on this new person holding her. Hi, Grace. Zoe's tears were falling freely now. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you about science and math and how to stand up to bullies who think girls can't be smart. And, her voice broke, and I'm going to love you so much. Marcus watched his daughters, one 12 years old and brilliant and brave, one minutes old and perfect and helpless, and felt something shift in his chest. Not just love, though there was plenty of that, but a sense of rightness, of pieces fitting together in ways he hadn't known were possible. Ellie reached for his hand. Marcus took it, and the four of them sat in the hospital room while afternoon light slanted through windows, and Grace slept in her sister's arms, and the future became something other than terrifying. 3 months after Grace was born, Marcus walked into FBI headquarters for the last time. The building looked different than he remembered, or maybe he was different. 3 years undercover had taught him to see institutions as stage sets, carefully constructed performances designed to project authority. Now, walking through security with his resignation papers in hand, Marcus saw only what it was: a building full of people doing jobs that consumed them. Agent Helen met him in her office. She'd been promoted since Hayes's arrest, now running the entire financial crimes division. The commendation letter Marcus was receiving sat on her desk, embossed FBI seal catching afternoon light. "You're sure about this?" Helen kept her voice neutral, but Marcus heard the disappointment underneath. "I'm sure." Marcus signed the resignation forms with steady hands. "The case is closed. 14 executives convicted, 6 board members serving time, 2,341 families compensated. My part is finished. Your part could be running this division in 5 years." Helen tapped the commendation letter. "The Sterling case was the biggest financial prosecution in Ohio history. I've earned the right to be present for my daughters." Marcus set down the pen. "All of them." Helen was quiet for a moment, then she stood, extended her hand. "It's been an honor, Agent Thompson. Just Marcus now." He shook her hand, feeling the weight of 15 years settle and lift simultaneously. No more agent, no more covers, just a man trying to figure out how to be a good father. That afternoon, Marcus came home. The house they'd bought 2 months prior, small but big enough for 4, to find Ellie on the living room floor with both daughters. Grace, 3 months old and fascinated by everything, grabbed at Zoe's finger while Zoe explained photosynthesis in terms a baby couldn't possibly understand, but seemed to appreciate anyway. Ellie looked up when Marcus entered. "How did it go?" "It's done." Marcus sat beside them on the floor, and Grace immediately reached for him with that grip that suggested she had no intention of letting go. 15 years with FBI finished. Any regrets? Ellie's question was careful. Marcus looked at his daughters. Zoe still patiently explaining chlorophyll to a 3-month-old. Grace making sounds that might have been words or might have been gas. And thought about all the cases he wouldn't work, all the criminals he wouldn't catch, all the promotions he'd never receive. Not a single one. Zoe glanced up from her photosynthesis lecture. "Does this mean you'll be home for dinner? Like, actually home, not working late home?" The question hit harder than it should have. Marcus pulled Zoe against his side with his free arm, Grace still gripping his other hand. "Every night, I promise." "Good." Zoe leaned into him. "Grace needs to learn that dads stick around." Ellie's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Outside, Cleveland summer heat pressed against windows, and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing music that drifted on lazy afternoon air. Inside, 4 people who'd found each other through lies and investigation and impossible circumstances sat on the floor and started learning how to be a family. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, Marcus was learning, mattered more. 9 months after Grace was born, Ellie Sterling walked into the offices of Sterling and Associates for the last time. The building was mostly empty now, staff long since relocated to other firms, files seized by federal investigators, the machinery of 40 years of business grinding to its final halt. Margaret Powell met her in the lobby, carrying a cardboard box that contained the last items from Ellie's office: her father's desk nameplate, her MBA diploma, a photograph of her mother that had sat on her desk for 7 years. "The paperwork is filed." Margaret's voice was gentle. "Sterling and Associates officially dissolved as of 9 a.m. this morning. Assets liquidated, restitution distributed, debts settled." Ellie took the box, feeling the weight of it. so light for something that represented 40 years of history, 30 years of fraud, 3 years of her leadership. How much? 237 million in restitution, divided among 2,341 families. Margaret consulted her tablet. Average payout $362,000, some more, some less depending on individual losses. Every victim made whole per the federal consent decree. The numbers should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like arithmetic performed on other people's suffering. Precise, clinical, insufficient. My father built this company to help people build futures. Ellie's voice was hollow. Instead, he stole those futures and I inherited the theft without question. You couldn't have known. I should have looked closer, questioned more, been less concerned with proving I deserved the position and more concerned with whether the position deserved to exist. They stood in the empty lobby, light slanting through windows onto marble floors that would soon belong to a tech company with no memory of what had happened here. Ellie thought about all the meetings she'd led in this building, all the decisions she'd made, all the times she'd believed she was honoring her father's legacy instead of perpetuating his crimes. Well, what will you do now? Margaret asked. Ellie thought about the nonprofit she'd been building, financial literacy education for underserved communities, funded by what remained of the sterling fortune after restitution. Thought about Marcus at home with both daughters, probably trying to keep Grace from eating something inappropriate while Zoe explained why rocks weren't food. Thought about the life she was building from the wreckage of everything she'd been. I have a daughter to raise. Ellie adjusted her grip on the box. 2 daughters if Zoe's decided to accept me. That's enough purpose for now. She walked out of Sterling and Associates for the last time, and the building didn't collapse behind her. The world didn't end. Traffic moved on Cleveland streets with the same indifference it always had, and the sky stretched overhead, vast and endless and completely unconcerned with human drama. At home, Marcus met her at the door. Grace, 9 months old now and pulling herself upright on furniture, toddled over with that drunken sailor gait toddlers had, patting Ellie's leg for attention. "Mama," Grace said, her first word delivered with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what it meant. Ellie set down the box of her former life and picked up her daughter. Grace grabbed her nose with sticky fingers, laughing at nothing in particular, and Ellie felt something break open in her chest. Not pain, but release. She'd destroyed her father's company, dismantled his legacy, proved that everything she'd worked for was built on theft and lies. But this... Grace's sticky fingers and uncertain laugh and the absolute trust in how she leaned into Ellie's arms. This was real. This was hers. This was something her father's crimes couldn't taint. "Welcome home," Marcus said, and Ellie understood he didn't mean the house. 18 months later, Marcus stood in the parking lot of what used to be Sterling and Associates. The building was empty now. Sold, soon to be gutted and rebuilt into something new. The sign had been removed, leaving ghost letters on the facade where Sterling and Associates had been emblazoned for 40 years. He stood alone for a moment watching those ghost letters. 40 years of history reduced to a vacancy. But history wasn't always worth preserving. Sometimes the bravest thing was tearing down what was broken and starting over. Marcus drove home to the house they'd bought 6 months ago. Small, but big enough for 4, in a neighborhood with good schools and a park 2 blocks away. Ellie sat on the porch steps, laptop open, working on non-profit paperwork, but watching her daughters with an expression Marcus had learned meant she was fighting happy tears. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Final numbers came through. Everyone got restitution. Cases closed. Your father's legacy is officially dismantled. Marcus kept his voice gentle. You did what you set out to do. Ellie closed her laptop, set it aside. I destroyed a company and sent my father's associates to prison. Some legacy. You protected victims and made sure no one else got hurt. Better legacy than most people manage. In the yard, Grace squealed as she discovered a particularly interesting rock. Zoe scooped her up, swinging the toddler while Grace giggled with pure joy. "I'm scared." Ellie's admission came quiet. "Every day I'm scared I'm going to mess this up. Mess them up. Turn into my mother, or my father, or some combination that ruins both our daughters. Join the club." Marcus put his arm around Ellie's shoulders. "I've been scared for 13 years. Zoe's entire life, plus 18 months of Grace. The fear doesn't go away." "Then what's the point?" "The point is showing up anyway. Being present even when you're terrified, loving them enough that your fear becomes less important than their happiness." Marcus thought about Sarah, about the 9 years he'd spent being afraid of moving on, of loving again, of building something new from broken pieces. Sarah would approve of this, he thought. Messy and imperfect and nothing like what they'd planned, but alive, actually living instead of surviving. Ellie leaned into him. "Grace asked for you this morning. Well, she said Dada and pointed at your bedroom. I think she was looking for you." "I was there. I gave her breakfast." "I know. But she wanted you again after. Just wanted to check that you were still around, that you hadn't disappeared." Ellie's voice carried layers Marcus understood completely. "She's already learning that people leave. I don't want her to spend her life waiting for abandonment." "Then we stay." Marcus kissed the top of Ellie's head. "We show up, we stay present, we prove every single day that we're not leaving. For Grace, for Zoe, for each other." "You make it sound simple." "It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've done undercover FBI investigations." Marcus stood, pulling Ellie up with him. "Come on, our daughters are eating rocks and need parental intervention." They walked into the yard together, Zoe still swinging Grace, who'd somehow acquired 3 more rocks and a leaf. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing music that drifted on the spring breeze. Marcus scooped Grace up, extracting rocks from her chubby fists while she protested. "No rocks, baby girl. Rocks are for looking at, not eating." Grace's response was to grab his nose and squeeze. Zoe laughed. Ellie pulled out her phone and took a picture, the 4 of them in golden hour light, messy and chaotic and absolutely nothing like the perfect family Marcus had once imagined. Better, he thought. More real, more honest, more worth having. Grace squealed again, this time reaching for Ellie. Marcus passed her over, watching as Ellie held their daughter with the careful tenderness of someone still learning to trust that love wouldn't break her. "Bigger than the sky." Zoe's voice came quiet at Marcus's elbow. "Remember when you used to say that about Mom? About how love was bigger than the sky?" "I remember. This is too, isn't it? All of us. This messy, weird family we're building." Zoe slipped her hand into Marcus's. "It's bigger than the sky." Marcus squeezed his older daughter's hand, watching Ellie and Grace explore the yard, collecting more inappropriate objects that would need to be removed from toddler mouths. His phone was silent. No FBI emergencies, no undercover assignments, no double life demanding attention. Just this. 4 people who'd found each other through lies and investigation and impossible circumstances, building something honest from the wreckage of everything that had come before. The sky stretched overhead, vast and endless and full of possibilities. They were bigger,